Everybody, welcome back. This is XL 10 Minute Leaders Live. I'm Graham Brown, joined in the studio by Tom Kereszti. We're going to talk about leadership success for the C-suite and beyond. Joining us all the way from San Diego. Tom, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, we got 10 minutes together. That's a very short time. We'll do our best to talk about leadership success. Are you ready, Tom?
Ready as I'll ever be.
Let's do it. All right, with time starts now. First question, Tom, what's on your business card?
Tom Kereszti. About 20 years ago, we were doing M&A activities. So we had this whole bunch of guys, senior executives, C-suite guys sitting around a table. So everybody's passing out their cards, COO, CIO, CFO. And there's this guy, Mike, who doesn't have any cards, right? So the conversation's getting going, and probably in the 15, 20 minutes, I figure out, and probably everybody around the table figures out, Mike's the guy, right? He's the guy, he's the decision maker. If anything's going to happen in this M&A activity, it's going to go through Mike. So look, I was actually fortunate enough to get Mike's card at the end, and it was just Mike. I mean, that's all that was in his card. But your card, it doesn't describe who you are. Your COO doesn't matter, the CFO. So all those titles are irrelevant because they don't make you. You make that title, right? So Mike didn't actually have a title on his card, but Mike was the guy, right? So if you're a CEO but you're a loser, right, it doesn't much matter. If people buy into you, and I guess that's really the lesson is people are going to have to buy into you. They don't buy into your title, they don't buy into your job, they buy into you. And if you know who you are, people will buy into you.
There's a knee-jerk reaction, isn't there, to exchange cards and to look at people's titles and cards. Maybe we should pause, reflect before we start doing that, is actually get to know that person first.
Yeah.
Maybe a bit of intrigue as well by not handing out, I don't have business cards, or I'm not handing them out. There's something about this guy. He's the guy. So that's maybe a lesson to pull away from that one. All right then, Tom. So we're going to talk about leadership, the C-suite and beyond. And what is the problem that we're facing at the moment? I mean, obviously we've had 18 months of a lot of change, and that's probably challenged a lot of ideas about leadership, as well as the tactics, the technical implementation of leadership as well. 18 months, the pandemic, has that changed a lot in terms of leadership and how people think about it?
Well, it changed a little bit, but here's the thing. It's not the 18 months. It's, 18, 20, 25 years. I mean, we all talk about leadership. I heard some crazy number that one time that the U.S. Market spends close to $500 million a year on leadership training and other stuff. And if we're spending this much money and it's so high in awareness, why are we so bad at it, right? I mean, why do we have so many bad leaders? Why do we have so many departments, companies that are suffering because of a lack of leadership or bad leadership? So, look, the pandemic has changed it a little bit because we went from an environment where everybody was together around the coffee machines, around conference rooms. So we were using all our senses. When people communicate, there's touch, feel, sight, smell, all these senses are working in unison as people are connecting and communicating. And then when we are reduced to these Zoom meetings or video meetings, a lot of that goes away. So part of that changed the leadership model. Part of that changed, what I think is extremely important in organizations, which is culture. So the culture changes a little bit because of the remote work environment. But look, that assumes that you had a good culture to start with.
It's merely amplified it, hasn't it? So you're talking about good leadership, bad leadership as well. Who would be an example of both? And let's maybe talk about somebody who is officially a leader, but not actually a good leader. So you mentioned at the beginning, like leadership by job title alone, rather than earned respect, if you like. Who would be an example of somebody who officially is a leader but isn't very good? And then who are examples of good leaders that we can talk about and use as case studies that people may not necessarily assume that they are a leader in business or are often overlooked?
Well, I'm going to stay away from politics because that's only
You've
going
been
to get
drawn
me in
in
trouble.
there. You know where I
So
wanted you to go.
I'm not going to politics.
All
So
right,
that's
let's
why
not
I'm
do that.
stay away from that. And actually, I don't know the guy's name.
Hmm.
But if you look at the C-suite of Enron, which happened many, many years ago, that was a pretty good example of bad leadership, right? Where a whole company went under, slew of investors went under, right? Or you can look at a guy like Bernie Madoff, right, who just ripped people off for millions and hundred millions of dollars. That's also an example of bad leadership, because those are self-serving people. Those are self-serving, C-suite individuals where they're not really looking at a benefit of others, and they're not really looking at something that's much bigger than themselves. They're kind of all internal. Say, okay, how do we benefit? And if that is the view of their leadership, then I think those are examples of bad leadership.
Is it personality? Is it culture? What causes that?
Culture is definitely part of it. In any organization. So let's take, for example, a startup company. Startup company usually has 1, 2, maybe 3 founders, and the founder's character usually becomes the de facto culture of the company. So to me, a culture of a company is equivalent to an individual's character. So if companies do not pay attention and consciously develop a positive and unique culture, they will end up with adapting somebody's character, which may be flawed. One of my mentors, John Maxwell, he tells his story about how his publisher, and it was just about the time that Enron was going under, his publisher said, "John, I want you to write me a book on business culture." And John's answer was, "I can't." He said, "What do you mean you can't?" He goes, "Well, business culture doesn't exist." It says, "Well, of course business culture exists. You got all these rotten businesses around us, and this and that." And John goes, "Look, there's culture, right? And there's ethics. And there's either ethics, and you have it in business, you have it in your family, you have it at other place, or you don't have it." So, in culture, if you got a rotten apple leading the organization, and the organization does not have a culture that can withstand the rotten apple, then you got a problem, because a rotten apple will kind of spoil the rest.
What makes you qualified or experienced or insightful enough to talk about this, that see things that people don't see, maybe from the inside? What's your superpower, Tom, when it comes to analyzing leadership and advising on culture?
Well, other than my good looks and my gray hair, the way this book C-Suite and Beyond was born, I do a lot of public speaking, and when I first got into public speaking, they said, well, the best way to do public speaking is kind of have personal stories, and that's how you connect with the audience. So I started writing all these personal stories, and then I said, well, heck, I got enough personal stories here to write a book. And then as I started structuring the book, I kind of started reflecting on the fact that, all right, well, there's actually some meaning behind these stories, and how do I structure these stories? And I came up with the 4 keys to leadership success, which is culture, values, growth strategy, and a team. So then I kind of looked at my life, and I said, all right, well, as any individual, as any human beings, I had some great wins, and I had some failures as well. So let me look at those areas on times in my life where I was successful, where things were working really well, and see what was leading to those wins. And then let me look at those areas of my life where I was failing or I wasn't doing too well, and say what was missing. So then I came up with these 4 keys, and I said to myself, all right, is that me? Oh, so let me look at some other leaders and leading companies like Pat Gelsinger, or who's the CEO of VMware. You look at guys like Steve Jobs. You look at other leaders and say, okay, well, do those people have, and do those organizations have these 4 things as well? And what you find is winning organizations and good leaders also share these same 4 keys. and it worked for me in business. I mean, in those times where I was successful in business, I was successful as an individual. These 4 keys were firing on all cylinders. And whenever I walked into an organization that I had to turn around, and the organization wasn't doing well, right? One or more of these keys were missing.
Okay, Tom. I'm sure people are going to be interested in the book, finding out more. Tom Kereszti, where do we go?
Easiest, it's a good thing is I have a last name that's very unique. So one way to do it is just, go to Amazon. Oh, here we go. Go to Amazon.
There we go.
Here's the book, right? And that kind of backtracks to me. Or you go to LinkedIn, Kereszti, Tom Kereszti. There's only me out there. It's not a common last name like Smith. So Kereszti. That's it. If you Google that, you'll sooner or later run across me or my sister, one or the other.
Only one writes a book on leadership, though, right? So there we go.
Yeah.
Tom Kereszti, everybody. Tom, thank you so much for joining us today, sharing insights from your book and on leadership as well, a little bit of background. It's been a real pleasure.
Graham, thank you so much for having me.